And it isn't Friday.
It's Saturday, August the 29th, 2020. Thank you, Keith, for liberally allowing me to slip a day. I just returned from a week-long drive across America, which I was so fascinated in that I reserved the URL videofromamerica.com, which I think I'm going to launch as one of the first shows on now.tv.
Nice.
So it's an interesting time, Keith, 2020, August. The FT headline this morning is US stocks have their best month in August 2020 since 1986, led, of course, by the tech stocks, by Silicon Valley. And at the same time, the coronavirus crisis continues to rage. More and more thousands of people are dying. There are many millions of people unemployed. And it's curious, at the same time all this is going on, we have the rise of a kind of an intellectual civil war, a financial intellectual civil war in Silicon Valley between the supporters and critics of SPACs. The critics are led by Bill Gurley, one of Silicon Valley's leading venture capitalists. But Gurley himself has his own critics, including those from within Andreessen Horowitz, which is also one of the Valley's leading venture capitalist firms. So two questions on this SPAC thing, Keith. Firstly, when historians look back at August 2020, and they're doing their little bit of research, and they see that Silicon Valley is preoccupied with this debate, which in my mind is fairly obscure over SPACs, stretches on IPOs. Will it reflect Silicon Valley's growing delusional culture, its inability to recognize the bigger picture? Or what do the SPAC, this debate about SPACs, does it tell us perhaps something a little bit more optimistic about how we're going to dig ourselves out of the crisis of August 2020, the broader economic crisis?
So yeah, the stock market is a good indication of the sophistication of America, because I think in decades past, if we were in the middle of coronavirus, everything would tank. But actually, the sophistication has allowed people to see what's growing as well as what is dying, or what's suffering versus what is benefiting. So Apple, is up massively because it's benefiting. Netflix is up massively. Zoom is up massively. Tesla, by the way, is up massively, 500%, I think, this year or something like that. It's been as low as $300. It's currently $2,300 a share.
I mean, PayPal now is up about 3x since last year. I mean, they're I think now the fifth most valuable company in Silicon Valley. Or tech company. They're worth more than any bank. I mean, so what we're seeing is an increasingly not so much tech-heavy stock market, but a tech-centric economy where every store in America is shutting, and yet Amazon does well. Where all the newspapers and media companies are shutting, and yet Apple does well. How does this, though, fit into the SPAC war and what's going on?
So the SPAC war. So firstly, for those who don't know, a special purpose acquisition company is a public company with a lot of cash in it. So the SPAC owners go and raise, maybe $500 million, and it sits in a public company, and that public company looks for a company to go and merge with, and the merged entity gets the cash, and the SPAC owners get a share in that public company. So it's a backdoor way of going public.
And is that a euphemism? I mean, will the Scott Fitzgeralds of the future write novels built around SPACs of ways in which some people tried to get very rich without doing a lot of work? After all, Paul Ryan, the ex ex-Republican leader of the House, certainly not known as either a financial or a tech wizard, now is taking over a SPAC or leading a SPAC. Does that, to me, would raise alarm bells that all these people who really know nothing about this world are getting involved in it?
Well, yeah, you should be concerned. None of us think that Paul Ryan is a mastermind at business. And Paul Ryan is smelling money, clearly. And there are now more SPACs than there have ever been. Bill Gurley's point in his piece in this week's newsletter is, if you're a company wanting to go public, you should interview 5 or 10 SPACs and refuse to do the deal they're offering you. And they'll have to make the deal better because there's now so much competition between SPACs. And, whenever that happens, people who only want to make money flood into the vehicles. And that is happening.
Yeah, but it's not bad when smart people are flocking in. It's when stupid people, the old cliche, which is so true, is you and I were around in the Valley in 1999. Every time you got into a cab, this was pre-Uber. So for better or worse, we had to sit in the back of taxis and have to listen to lectures from taxi drivers about whether or not to buy pets.com or amazon.com. You knew that the gig was up. Is something similar going on with SPACs? It's always easy money to me is, again, a warning signal, because you and I both know that there is no such thing as easy money.
Correct. And therein lies the rub. There are only so many companies that should go public, no matter what the path. There's only so many companies that should. The requirements for going public were shown this week when Snowflake, along with Unity, Palantir, and one or two others, said they were going to go public. Snowflake revenue went from 140 million last year to 250 this year. And if you forward look from the most recent 12 month, it's 547 million going ahead. So it's growing at 120% a year. It should go public. But contrast that with some of the other companies, they shouldn't go public. Now, SPACs are going to attract companies seeking a shortcut and an early public offering. And what will happen, and I've done a few public offerings, what will happen is if you don't have growth and you don't have predictable revenues, your stock will tank and you shouldn't go public. So there's an overabundance of SPACs and a shortage of companies that deserve to go public.
So yeah, and Bill Gurley is one of the real grown-ups in this world. He's always been one to tell the truth. Is that fair?
Yes, but he's also a bitter, cynical, older man now, and he is biting the hand that feeds him. He's actually should be a little bit careful. The Valley is often thought of being totally separate from New York. But actually, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs are the bridge between the Valley and New York. And that bridge carries billions of dollars across it every year. And by basically pointing the finger at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and saying, you're stealing from me, he threatens the existence of the bridge. Andreessen Horowitz, on the other hand, are a lot more savvy. They understand how mutually reliant New York and Silicon Valley are for the growth of value, and they're saying no, the IPO is fine. It's a question of supply and demand. The price is what the price is, and nobody's stealing from anybody.
So it sounds, Keith, as if you're on you're in the Andreessen Horowitz camp. You think that Gurley is a previous generation VC protecting turf, which is at this point kind of unprotectable, and so Andreessen Horowitz, as so often in the past, see the future, and the future are SPACs. Is that fair?
I'm actually in neither camp. I don't look at this from the point of view of the venture investor or the point of view of the banker. If I did, I could end up in either camp, to be honest. There's pros and cons of both. But if you look at it from the point of view of a founder, which is all I can do because that's what I've been, I've done public offerings, and honestly, Andrew, it's just a fundraising event. And it honestly doesn't matter how you get there. You can raise money before the public offering and do a direct listing. You can raise money by going into a SPAC, or you can raise money by doing a traditional IPO with a roadshow. As long as you raise money and you can fund growth, any one of those three is fine. So I think as a founder, it's like, shut up, guys, let me get on with it and do what I think is right. But in their shoes, these are paydays. And Gurley's saying, you're stealing some of my payday to the bankers. And Andreessen is saying, I'm fine with the bankers taking a piece of my payday. It's imperfect, but it's okay. There's pros and cons on both sides, and neither one of them is really a strategic difference.
And very briefly, Keith, because I know there's a lot of other stuff going on this week. What's going to happen on this SPAC war? Is it over? Is it just beginning?
The war might. It's one of those, what do they call it when there's a shouting war and handbags at dawn rather than a real fight?
Cold War.
It's one of those. It's a fake war. And it will come and go and ebb and flow as SPACs and direct listings. The NASDAQ applied this week to the NYSE to do direct listings, which is no money raised, but have some money raised, but not through a traditional IPO money raised, but the money coming from Sand Hill Road in like a mezzanine round. So this is not going to go away as a conversation. But if you're a founder, I would say ignore it and just focus on what's right for you and do that.
Wise words, as always, from Keith Teare, founder of many successful and, of course, failed companies. Keith, you mentioned there was a scarcity of good companies to do IPOs. There's some interesting pieces this week you picked out about the future of content, newsletters, and other new economic models for creators like you and I to make money. What's happening on this front?
Yeah, this is in the reads of the week, and there was two. One is about the economics of newsletters, which I have, so I kind of was interested in. And the other one is,
are you making money? Be honest. How much are you making a month on these newsletters now?
Well, there's the interesting thing. I don't actually agree with the analysis because I don't charge for my newsletter. People can choose to pay for it if they want me to be able to spend more time on it, but it's free. If they want it, they can get it for free. If they choose to pay me, they can. And that's because I believe that my value is enhanced through the newsletter without having to charge for it. And that happens in different ways. But this story by Eric Feng, new media platforms are enabling a new creator type, digitally native vertical creators, is really all about what you and I are doing, and lots of other people like Steve Gilmore's been doing it longer than either of us in the Gilmore Gang, which I recommend people should watch. And it's basically about living in the near future today, being able to engage. Like I have a Telegram channel, t.me/thatwastheweek, where right now as we are talking, people could be there sending messages to us so we can engage. I have the newsletter, which they can read. We have this video, which they can listen to. And that is very different to what media meant even 2 or 3 years ago. So it's really just saying, hey, everything's changing and something new is going to happen. And then,
but on the other hand, it is saying everything's changing, but then it's also suggesting nothing's changing, because there's nothing more old-fashioned than a newsletter, and there's nothing more old-fashioned than charging for content.
Andrew, I agree with that. What goes around comes around, but because the underlying platforms change, like today, there are probably about 4 billion humans on the earth that you can target with a newsletter. And they almost all of them have smartphones. They certainly have desktops, and some have both. That distribution revolution has taken place for about 10 years. So things that look the same actually aren't the same looked at from a business point of view. the opportunities are now massive compared to what they were, even though the formats might not change that much. And the ability to plug the newsletters into other engagement channels is off the charts, you know, with Twitter and Facebook and Telegram and everything.
How does this connect, do you think, to this debate over silence culture? Because after all, some of the biggest names now doing newsletters are people like Andrew Sullivan, who was essentially fired from New York Magazine because of his politically incorrect positions. Do you see the rise of silence culture as being good for the newsletter industry?
I think that's a very individual answer. It really depends on the person. So Andrew
the person
Sullivan,
doing the newsletter or the person doing the reading?
The person doing the newsletter. I do think anyone that has an audience that gets squeezed out of their previous container, like New York Magazine or whatever, or the Atlantic, can take that audience with them now, or at least a lot of it. The audience has no loyalty to the wrapper. It has.
But we've been hearing for 20 years that the New York Times was finished, that a Thomas Friedman, a Maureen Dowd, a David Brooks would be able to manage their own brands, but that's never happened. So is this again another false dawn in the promise of an individualized media platform where individual brands will replace the New York Times or the Atlantic or CNN?
You know, I think that's an old debate. What's the guy who went to the radio show, the guy with the glasses and long hair that everyone listens to, the comedian, what's his name? Come on, Andrew. You know it. Anyway, that guy.
He went from where to where?
He went to satellite radio. He got the biggest paycheck ever.
Yeah.
And
we all know who he is. We know him so well we can't remember his name. But yeah. The shock jock guy. And anyway, he basically satellite radio brand became subordinated to his brand, and it showed the power of the individual. And I think that does happen a lot. And it's not a new thing that it happens. It's an old thing. But I think the tools to enable it now are richer and better than ever before. Like, think of me. I'm not a big brand, but I have a podcast on that goes out on iTunes and Spotify, and all the other places. I have this video on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch, which we're on live right now. I have the newsletter. It's all one thing that I do. It takes a few hours a week. You know, it's amazing that we can do that. Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, is that people 20 years ago, people were launching blogs. And now, as you suggested, the newsletter, which is essentially a blog, a distributed blog, is part of, or should be part of, a broader media strategy, although I think a lot of journalists don't understand that. Finally, Keith, our third big story of the week is the second part of the Apple Epic war. What's happening on that front? Who's winning, Apple or Epic?
Apple is certainly winning. Yesterday, Apple followed through on its threat to pull the developer account of Epic, which means that all of Epic's App Store stuff is now dysfunctional. You can't download an Epic app in the App Store.
So the platforms are winning.
So yeah, the shop owner, it turns out, owns the customers, and the wholesaler, it turns out, has to play by the rules. Otherwise, they're out. So if that's true at Safeway as well, if whoever supplies their potatoes started doing something against Safeway's rules, they'd get a new potato supplier. So it just is what it is. And I don't really know what the logic was behind Epic's attempt to shoplift, as Apple called it. Anyway, I mean, they could never have won. So what was the point? I'd be firing the CEO if I was the shareholders of that company.
And finally, before we get to tweet of the week, the Apple Epic thing then is finished. What about TikTok? What's the update on TikTok? TikTok seems as if we have new entrants into the TikTok lottery.
Actually, the Chinese government made a move today, which has taken everyone by surprise. The Wall Street Journal reported it, and it's not in my newsletter because it's literally just happened, which is the Chinese government, just like the US has export controls on things going to Iran and so on, China is putting export controls on anything that includes user-generated content and is threatening to retaliate against the US by preventing TikTok from being an exporter. I haven't actually read all the details yet, but it looks as if the Chinese government isn't taking this line down and is going to get involved in a fractious fight about the national domicility of software. And it feels to me as if software shouldn't have a national domicile in this global era. It's appropriate that software should be global and that nation states should not have any ability to determine where they choose to do business, especially when it's political, as it mostly is. So
we've talked about this before, Keith, and I think we disagree. You see the future as international, global. I see the future as national, for better or worse. I'm not necessarily celebrating it. And then your tweet of the week was an inspiring one. Sometimes your tweets of the week, at least we don't have Paul Graham again involved with this. Your tweet of the week really reflected people's generosity and willingness to stand up for what's right.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. It's this is it. I'll play the video.
Now Lewis Brinson announced as the leadoff hitter for Miami, and all of the Marlins and Mets have come out of their dugouts.
The only thing left on the field was a Black Lives Matter shirt, and these are not black teams, as you can see. This is black and white players together, making the point that the shooting 7 times in the back is not okay. I thought it was just an amazing show of solidarity and concern.
It's not really a tweet, though.
The movie is in the tweet. The tweet is saying what happened, and it has the movie inside. It's got
so once again,
so far.
Video, audio, platforms, everything's integrated these days.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, amazing. I mean, we would have need to have been CNN to do that a few years ago.
Yeah, well, as we know, Keith, you and I, Now TV will be CNN one day when we grow up. But for the moment, that was the week that was, and I will look forward to seeing you again next week for more on Spacs and more on the fundamental shifts in the nature of the world's economy and culture.
Thank you, Andrew.